The rain-slicked streets of Manhattan gleamed under the sodium glow of street lamps as Jake Harlan stumbled out of the subway, his umbrella inverting like a bad joke in the wind. He was already late for the office holiday party, some glitzy affair at the rooftop lounge of the Sterling Tower, and the last thing he needed was another detour. But there she was, huddled in the doorway of a shuttered deli, a woman with silver-streaked hair matted by the downpour, her threadbare coat clutched around her like a shield against the indifferent world. Their eyes met, and in that split second, Jake saw not pity's ghost, but a fierce, unbroken spark that yanked him under like the current of the East River. "Miss," he called, voice barely cutting the gale. She looked up, eyes sharp as broken glass. "You can't stay out here. The party's just up the block. Warm food, dry clothes if you want 'em." "Come with me," she stared, rain tracing rivers down her wrinkled cheeks, then nodded once, slow and deliberate, as if accepting a dare from fate itself. Jake extended his hand, and just like that, he invited a stranger, a homeless woman he'd never met, into the glittering heart of his corporate life, unaware that the thread he'd tugged would unravel everything he thought he knew about love, loss, and the men who hid behind boardroom smiles. Jake Harlan had always been the guy who noticed the cracks in the facade. The 28, with his tousled dark hair, easy grin, and a job in mid-level marketing at Sterling Dynamics, a powerhouse in fintech that turned Wall Street dreams into algorithmic gold, he blended into the New York hustle like camouflage. But beneath the chinos and button-downs, Jake carried the quiet ache of a man who'd loved once and lost spectacularly. His ex, Ryan, had bailed 2 years back for a promotion in London, leaving Jake with a sublet in Brooklyn and a Tinder profile gathering digital dust. Gay in a city that celebrated rainbows but still whispered judgments, Jake had learned to armor up, work hard, laugh louder, and never let the loneliness show. The elevator to the rooftop hummed with the low buzz of anticipation. The stranger, Mary, she'd murmured, no last name, standing awkwardly beside him in her damp coat, dripping onto the marble floor. Jake shot her a reassuring smile. "It's nothing fancy, just the usual schmoozefest. Free booze helps." She managed a faint chuckle, her voice raspy from disuse, like gravel under tires. "Fancy's overrated, kid. Sometimes it's the unexpected that sticks." The doors slid open to a sea of twinkling lights and laughter, the Manhattan skyline sprawling out like a promise kept. Servers in crisp black uniforms wove through clusters of executives, their ties loosened, cheeks flushed from craft cocktails. Jake steered Mary toward the coat check, but she waved him off. "I'll keep it. Feels like home." He nodded, grabbing 2 flutes of champagne from a passing tray. As they clinked glasses, a ripple went through the crowd, heads turning, whispers snaking like smoke. "Jake Harlan? As I live and breathe." The voice was velvet over steel, belonging to Carl Whitaker, the company's charismatic VP of operations. At 35, Carl was the golden boy of Sterling, tall, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair cropped close and eyes the color of storm-tossed seas. He commanded rooms without raising his voice, his tailored suits hugging a frame honed by weekend hikes in the Catskills. Rumors swirled about him. Divorced, no kids, a mystery wrapped in mergers, but Jake had always admired from afar, nursing a harmless crush that bloomed in stolen glances during all-hands meetings. "Carl, hey, man, glad you made it." Jake thrust out a hand, pulse kicking up a notch. Carl's grip was firm, lingering a beat too long, his gaze flicking curiously to Mary. Who's your plus one? Didn't know you were bringing a date. Jake laughed, a touch too loud. Not exactly. This is Mary. Found her braving the storm outside. Figured she'd earned a night off the streets. The words hung there, bold and unfiltered, the kind of New York candor that could charm or curdle. Carl's expression shifted. Surprise, then something deeper, like recognition cracking through ice. He turned to Mary, his face paling under the string lights. Mary! His voice cracked, raw and unguarded. She met his eyes, unflinching, and for a heartbeat, the party faded, the jazz quartet swing, the clink of ice in highballs, leaving only the weight of unspoken years. Carl Whitaker. Been a long time. The revelation hit like a freight train through Penn Station. Mary wasn't just any homeless woman. She was Mary Whitaker, wife to Harold Whitaker, the reclusive CEO of Sterling Dynamics, who'd vanished from the public eye 5 years ago after a brutal scandal involving embezzlement allegations that tanked the stock overnight. Harold Stern, silver-haired Harold, the man who'd built the company from a garage startup in Silicon Valley to a midtown behemoth, had retreated to their estate in the Hamptons, leaving Carl to steer the ship through the storm. And Mary? She'd spiraled after the fallout. The mansion foreclosed, the friends who ghosted, the bottle that became her constant companion. Until it all crumbled, and she ended up on the streets Jake had pulled her from. You invited her, Carl stammered, not accusatory, but laced with awe, as if Jake had conjured a ghost. Mary shrugged, sipping her champagne with the poise of old money. Kids got heart. More than most in this tower. The crowd had begun to notice, murmurs swelling like a tide. Jake felt exposed, his good deed twisting into spectacle. But Carl's hand on his shoulder grounded him warm, steady. Come on, Carl murmured, steering them to a quieter corner by the glass railing, the city lights blurring below. Let's get you both out of the spotlight. As they settled into plush lounge chairs, Mary leaned back, exhaling like she'd been holding her breath for a decade. Harold's not the monster they paint him as, you know. The scandal, it broke him. Broke us. He thought he was protecting the company, cooking books to keep investors happy. But when it blew up, her voice trailed, eyes distant. I couldn't watch him fade away in that big empty house. So I left. Thought it'd be easier to disappear. Carl nodded, his jaw tight. He asks about you every board meeting, Mary. Subtly, but he does. And you, Jesus, I've been searching shelters, food banks, private investigators, even. There was pain there, raw and unpolished, the kind that bound colleagues like family in the cutthroat world of finance. Jake listened, the champagne turning sour in his gut. He'd always idolized Harold from afar, the visionary who'd mentored Carl, who'd built Sterling on a creed of innovation and grit. But this, it humanized the myth, stripping away the boardroom armor to reveal a man crushed by his own ambition. And Carl. Carl looked wrecked, his usual polish cracked, revealing the loyal friend who'd shouldered the burden alone. Why didn't you say something? Jake asked Mary softly, his hand brushing hers in solidarity. She smiled faintly, patting his knuckles. Pride, honey, and shame. But tonight feels like kismet. The conversation flowed then, tentative at first, then freer stories of Hampton summers, the wild 90s startup scene, the quiet betrayals that eroded a marriage like acid rain on granite. Carl shared how Harold had pulled him from a dead-end job in Chicago a decade ago, molding him into the exec he was today. "He's family," Carl said, voice low. "More than blood." Sometimes, Jake felt a pull toward Carl then, magnetic and unbidden, a shared vulnerability in the face of Mary's quiet strength. Their knees brushed under the table, accidental but electric, and when Carl's gaze lingered on Jake's mouth a fraction too long, the air thickened with possibility. But as the night wore on, a shadow loomed. Harold's name evoked not just loss, but a ghost who might yet return to claim his throne. By midnight, the party had thinned, guests trickling out to cabs and cold sheets. Mary rose, coat reclaimed, but lighter now, as if the weight of invisibility had lifted. "Thank you, Jake," she said, hugging him fiercely. "For seeing me," to Carl, softer. "Tell him. Tell Harold I'm still here. Somewhere." Carl walked her to the elevator, promising resources, shelters with strings attached to real recovery. A direct line to him anytime. Jake hung back, heart pounding from the whiskey and the what-ifs swirling in his head. When Carl returned, alone, he slid into the chair beside Jake, their shoulders touching. "You saved the night, Harlan," Carl said, his breath warm against Jake's ear. "More than you know," Jake swallowed, the skyline winking conspiratorially. "Just did what felt right." "But her husband's the CEO. That's some plot twist." Carl chuckled, low and rueful. "Yeah. And tomorrow, it's gonna be a hell of a sequel." As they lingered, the conversation turned personal. Jake's quiet admissions about Ryan, the ache of loving in a city that moved too fast. Carl's guarded hints at his own solitude, a life of deals and dinners but no one to come home to. The attraction simmered, unspoken but alive, until Carl's phone buzzed. A text from Harold himself, terse and urgent. "Bring her back. Now." The night cracked open then, possibilities fracturing into urgency. Jake didn't know it yet, but in inviting Mary, he'd not only unearthed a family secret, he'd ignited a romance that would test loyalties, bare souls, and redefine what it meant to build a life from the ruins of someone else's fall. Dawn crept over the Brooklyn Bridge like a hesitant lover, painting the East River in strokes of rose and steel. Jake tossed in his queen-sized bed, sheets tangled from dreams of rooftops and revelations, Mary's raspy laugh echoing like a half-remembered song. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. "Carl. At 6:17 a.m. "Coffee? My place. Need to talk about last night." Attached was an address in the West Village, a brownstone that screamed old money discreetly renovated. Jake showered quickly, the hot water sluicing away the hangover haze, but not the buzz under his skin. Carl Whitaker, the man who'd mentored half the execs at Sterling, who'd navigated the company through the post-scandal rebuild with a grace that bordered on mythic. And gay? Jake had speculated in late-night bar chats with colleagues, but nothing concrete. Just the way Carl's eyes lingered on broad shoulders, the absence of weekend wedding ring tan lines. Last night's brush of knees had confirmed it. Mutual, electric, a spark in the powder keg of corporate propriety. The brownstone was a jewel box of exposed brick and reclaimed wood, sunlight filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows onto a kitchen island laden with fresh bagels and intelligentsia pour-over. Carl answered the door in joggers and a faded Columbia tee, hair tousled, stubble shadowing his jaw, domestic, disarming. "You made it," he said, pulling Jake into a hug that lingered, bodies aligning with effortless heat. God, I needed this. Over coffee, black for Carl, splash of oat milk for Jake. The story unfolded in halting fragments. Harold Whitaker wasn't just the CEO. He was Carl's anchor, the man who'd spotted his potential at a Chicago recruiting fair and lured him east with promises of big leagues and bigger dreams. He was like a father, Carl admitted, stirring his mug absently. But more. Mentor, confidant. We kept Sterling afloat after the feds came knocking. Nights in the office till dawn, piecing together audits, reassuring investors. Mary. She was the glue. Warm, funny, the one who'd drag us to Coney Island for hot dogs when it all got too heavy. Jake leaned against the counter, nursing his cup. Then the scandal hit. Embezzlement charges dropped like a bomb. Insider trading whispers, falsified reports to juice quarterly earnings. Harold took the fall, pled guilty to misdemeanors, paid the fines. But the board sidelined him, made me interim head. He holed up in the Hamptons. And Mary. She couldn't cope. The society pages turned on her, called her complicit. She started drinking, then wandering. Last I heard, she'd been spotted in shelters upstate. And now, Jake's voice was soft, probing the wound. Carl's eyes met his, stormy and searching. Now, you've given us a shot at mending. I drove her to a discreet rehab in Connecticut last night. Top shelf. No paparazzi. Harold's en route from the Hamptons. They're talking, really talking, for the first time in years. He reached across the island, fingers grazing Jake's wrist. You did that. A random act of kindness that rippled out. The touch ignited something primal, Jake's breath catching as Carl's thumb traced a slow circle on his skin. It wasn't random, Jake murmured. I saw her, Carl. Like I see you, cracks and all. The kiss happened then, inevitable as gravity, Carl closing the distance, hands cupping Jake's face, lips firm and tasting of coffee and quiet desperation. It was slow at first, exploratory, tongues tentative, bodies pressing closer until the island edge dug into Jake's hip. When they broke apart, foreheads touching, Carl whispered, I've wanted this since that team-building retreat in the Berkshires. You, in those hiking boots, laughing at my bad jokes. Jake grinned, heart hammering. Why wait? Company's policy on interoffice romance is, don't get caught. They tumbled into it like starved men at a feast, clothes shedding in the hallway. Carl's bedroom a sanctuary of crisp linens and city views. It was raw, reverent. Carl's hands mapping Jake's lean runner's build, Jake's mouth tracing the scars of old appendectomies and late-night stress lines. Afterward, tangled in sheets, they talked, really talked about the exes who'd shaped them, the fears of vulnerability in a world that prized invincibility. Carl confessed his bisexuality, the sham of straight passing in boardrooms. Jake shared the sting of Ryan's ghost, the therapy sessions that taught him self-worth wasn't negotiable. But bliss was fleeting. By noon, Carl's phone erupted. Voicemails from Harold, laced with urgency. Carl, this is bad. Mary's clean, but the press got wind leaks from the rehab staff. And there's more. Meet me at the office. Now. The drive to Midtown was a blur of cabs and caffeine. Jake riding shotgun in Carl's Audi. The radio droning NPR's market update. Sterling stock had dipped 2% on vague rumors of executive instability. Whispers that Harold's return spelled more scandal. At the tower, Security buzzed them up to the C-suite floor, where Harold waited in the glass-walled conference room. A ghost in bespoke wool. 62. Gaunt but regal, his once jet hair now fully silver, eyes hollowed by regret. Carl. Harold rose, embracing him like a son. His gaze shifted to Jake, praising. And you, the Samaritan. Mary speaks highly. Jake shook his hand, firm despite the nerves. Just glad she's safe, sir. Harold sank into his chair, gesturing to the city vista. Safe. That's the dream, isn't it? I thought I was building an empire for us, for her, for the legacy. But greed blinded me, falsifying those projections. It was a shortcut, a desperate bid to keep the lights on during the '08 crash echo. The feds saw theft. I saw survival. His voice cracked. Mary paid the price. I paid with isolation. And now, this leak, it's sabotage. Someone inside, feeding the press. Carl's face hardened. Who? The board's loyalists are gone. We've purged the snakes. Not all. Harold's eyes narrowed. Harold, wait. No. Carl, there's someone you trust too much. Remember the old crew from the Chicago days? That analyst. The one who jumped ship after the scandal but clawed back in as a consultant. Jake's stomach dropped. You mean? Harold? No, God. No. That's me. Harold chuckled bitterly. I mean Victor Lang, but everyone called him Vic. Sharp as a tack, but bitter. He blamed me for his demotion, swore revenge. And there's another, your old flame, isn't there? The one who left for greener pastures but keeps circling. Carl stiffened. You mean? No. Harold, that's ancient history. Jake's mind reeled. Old flame? But before he could probe, the door burst open. A harried assistant, tablet in hand. Sir, the journal's running it, Whitaker wife's downfall. From penthouse to pavement. And anonymous sources claim Sterling's ripe for a hostile takeover. Chaos erupted, calls to PR. Damage control huddles, leaving Jake on the periphery, the outsider in a family fray. As the afternoon bled into strategy sessions, he caught Carl's eye across the table. A plea, promise. Stay. But doubt crept in like fog off the harbor. Who was this ex, and how deep did the betrayals run? By evening, as Jake headed home, Carl texted, Dinner tomorrow? My treat. We need this, you and me. Jake replied yes. But the seed was planted. Love in the crosshairs of legacy and lies. Little did he know, the real storm was Harold's shadow, not the CEO, but a man named Harold Voss, Carl's ex from college, a slick lawyer now embedded at Sterling as general counsel. Harold Voss, charming, ambitious, and harboring a grudge that would torch everything in its path. The betrayal was coming, swift as a margin call, and Jake, heart open, fists clenched, would be caught in the blaze. The West Village Bistro was a cozy nook of candlelight and exposed brick, the kind of place where power couples nursed Negronis and dissected the latest Met Gala drama. Jake arrived early, nerves jangling like loose change, opting for a corner booth with a view of the street, people watching as armor against the vulnerability gnawing at him. Carl's text from the morning had been a lifeline. Can't stop thinking about you. 8 p.m. El Mulino. Wear that grin. But the day's headlines had soured the romance. Tabloids feasting on Mary's tragic return. Pundits speculating on Sterling's fragility. Jake scrolled his phone, the glow illuminating his face, handsome in its earnest lines, but shadowed by the what-ifs. Carl swept in at 8:05, coat slung over one arm, apology on his lips. Traffic from the office, Harold's hold up with the lawyers, drafting a statement. He slid into the booth, close enough that their thighs pressed. Heat immediate and intentional. The sommelier poured Barolo, deep red as unspoken confessions. And as the first course arrived, arancini dusted with truffle, Carl's hand found Jake's under the table, interlacing fingers like a vow. "Tell me about you," Carl said, eyes soft in the low light. Not the Samaritan, not the marketing whiz. The Jake who grew up dreaming of Broadway but settled for spreadsheets. Jake laughed, the sound easing the knot in his chest. Jersey boy, born and bred. Dad was a mechanic. Mom taught 3rd grade. I knew I was gay by 13. Stole glances at the lifeguards at Wildwood. Came out senior year. Got the usual fireworks. Support from Mom. Silence from Dad. Moved to the city for NYU film. But bills have a way of rerouting dreams. Now, I pitch ad campaigns for apps that promise connection but deliver swipes. Carl squeezed his hand. Sounds like half of us. Me, Midwest farm stock, cornfields outside Des Moines. Dad wanted me in agribusiness. I bolted for business school. Met Harold Voss there. He was intense. Charismatic. The guy who owned every kegger and courtroom mock trial. We were together 2 years, fireworks. The kind that burn hot and fast. He proposed a merger. Metaphorically. I ran when it got too possessive. Jake's fork paused midair. Harold Voss? Sterling's GC? The one handling the leak fallout. Carl nodded, jaw tightening. Yeah. We ended messy. He accused me of using him for connections. Haven't spoken civilly since. But he's good at his job. So CEO Harold hired him back last year. Water under the bridge. Or so I thought. The name landed like a stone in still water. Harold Voss. The ex with a vendetta. Jake filed it away, steering the talk to lighter shores. Carl's guilty pleasure for 80s hair metal. Jake's botched attempt at pottery class. Laughter flowed with the wine. Building to dessert. Tiramisu shared from one spoon. Carl's foot hooking Jake's calf under the table. When the check came, Carl paid with a black Amex. Then tugged Jake into the night air, crisp with autumn bite. They walked the village's crooked streets, hands brushing, then linking boldly. At Carl's brownstone, the door barely clicked shut before clothes hit the floor. Urgent, unscripted, bodies crashing together on the Persian rug. Carl was all controlled power, pinning Jake with a gaze that stripped souls bare. Whispers of stay and mine punctuating gasps. It was more than sex. It was claiming space in each other's wreckage. Mary's rescue forging a bridge over Carl's guarded heart. Come morning, tangled in sunlight, Jake traced Carl's collarbone. This feels real. Scary real. Carl kissed his temple. Good scary. The kind worth fighting for. But the fight came sooner than either imagined. Monday's all hands was a pressure cooker. CEO Harold, silver-haired and somber. Addressing the team via video link from the Hamptons. Mary at his side. Her hand in his. A quiet testament to redemption. We've weathered storms before, he intoned. Voice steady. This leak? It's noise. Sterling stands on integrity, yours, mine, ours. Applause rippled, but Jake caught the undercurrent. Sidelong glances at Carl. Whispers about the wife angle humanizing the brand or dooming it. Post-meeting, Jake lingered in the break room, pouring coffee, when Harold Voss sauntered in mid-40s, lean as a switchblade, blonde hair slicked back, suit cut like armor. Harlan, right? The office hero. His smile didn't reach his eyes. A predator's gleam. Jake nodded warily. Just did what anyone would. Voss leaned against the counter, stirring sugar with deliberate slowness. Anyone? Or just the ones gunning for a promotion? Word is, you're cozy with Carl. Careful, he collects strays, but they don't stick. The jab landed low, Jake's grip tightening on his mug. Personal advice? Save it for your billable hours. Voss chuckled. Low and oily. Touchy. Just looking out. Carl's got baggage. That Whitaker mess is a tar pit. And you're the fresh meat. He exited with a wink, leaving Jake seething, the coffee bitter on his tongue. By lunch, the sabotage escalated. An internal memo leaked to Bloomberg, detailing irregularities in Sterling's post-scandal audits, fingers pointing at Carl's oversight. The stock plunged 5%, board calls flooding Carl's line. Jake found him in his office, head in hands, the city a gray smear beyond the windows. It's Voss, Carl growled, slamming a fist on the desk. Has to be. He's got access. Motive, the scorned lover routine. Jake crossed to him, hands on shoulders. Proof? Not yet. But I'm digging. Carl pulled him down for a fierce kiss. Desperate anchor in the gale. Don't let him get to you. We're in this. The romance deepened in stolen moments. Rooftop lunches where Carl fed Jake falafel bites. Evenings at dive bars in Hell's Kitchen. Trading stories of first loves and family holidays. Jake introduced Carl to his Brooklyn crew, queer artists and baristas who grilled him with good-natured suspicion, then embraced him over board games and boxed wine. Carl, in turn, shared quiet nights at the Brownstone, cooking Midwestern meatloaf while jazz spun on vinyl, their bodies syncing like a well-rehearsed duet. But Voss's shadow lengthened. Anonymous emails hit Jake's inbox. Grainy photos of Carl with past flings, captions dripping venom. Player or pawn? Office gossip swelled. Colleagues side-eyeing Jake's meteoric rise. Then the gut punch. A late-night call from Carl. Voice hollow. Mary's relapsed. Harold found her stash, pills from the rehab doc. She's stable, but... Voss tipped off the press. He knew her weak spots. Rage boiled in Jake. We confront him. No. Carl's tone brooked no argument. Not yet. We play smart, record, report, let HR bury him, but trust frayed at the edges. Jake lay awake that night, Carl's snores soft beside him, wondering if love could weather corporate knives. The climax brewed, a board retreat in the Adirondacks, where truths would erupt like fault lines, and betrayal's face would be laid bare. The Adirondacks Lodge was a timbered fortress against the November chill, pine-scented air crisp as starched collars. The board sequestered for 2 days of strategic realignment. Jake had wrangled an invite as Carl's marketing liaison. A flimsy cover for the undercurrent pulling him north. Solidarity, yes, but laced with the thrill of stolen nights in guest cabins. Fireplaces crackling as lovers. Sterling's elite, suits from Goldman transplants to VC sharks, arrived by private shuttle, briefcases bulging with projections. But the real currency was whispers. Mary's miracle rehab stint splashed across page 6, Voss's leaks painting Carl as the fall guy. Carl drove them up in the Audi, Jake's hand on his thigh the whole 5 hours from the city, radio alternating Springsteen anthems and tense silences. This retreat's make or break, Carl said, eyes on the winding blacktop. Harold's pushing for his full return, CEO title reinstated. If the board balks, we're sunk, Jake squeezed. Grounding. They won't. You've held the fort. And Mary's story? Its gold redemption arc for the ages. The lodge sprawled like a millionaire's memory. Great hall with vaulted beams. Lake views shimmering under overcast skies. Check-in was a flurry, handshakes. Name tags, Voss lingering at the periphery. His gaze a laser on Carl. Then flicking to Jake with predatory amusement. Dinner that night was forced bonhomie. Venison and vintage Cabernet. Toasts to resilience. Jake sat beside Carl, their pinkies linking under the damask cloth. A secret Morse code amid the deal-making drone. But Voss struck postprandial, cornering Jake by the roaring hearth as Carl huddled with the CFO. Enjoying the view, Harlan, or just the boss's bed? Voss's breath reeked of scotch. His tie askew. Jake's jaw clenched. Back off, Voss. Your game's up, leaks, threats. It's pathetic. Voss's laugh was a bark. Pathetic? I loved him, you know. Carl and we were endgame. Until he bailed for Whitaker's shadow, chasing daddy issues in a pinstripe suit. His eyes narrowed, venom spilling. I clawed back to Sterling to remind him, I'm the upgrade. And you? Collateral. One whisper to the board about your little rooftop pickup. And poof, Mary's savior becomes the scandal boy. Jake stepped closer, voice steel. Touch us, and I'll bury you. Recordings, emails, we've got plenty. Voss smirked, unfazed. Bluff. But fine, watch your back. He melted into the crowd, leaving Jake's pulse thundering. Sleep evaded that night, the cabin's king bed a battlefield of what-ifs. Carl stirred at 3 a.m., pulling Jake close. Can't sleep, Voss, Jake admitted, spilling the confrontation. Carl cursed softly, holding tighter. He's unraveling. Tomorrow's the vote, Harold's pitch. If we nail it, Voss is out. Dawn brought whitewater kayaking, team-building farce on the lake, board members paddling tandem, egos bruising on rapids. Jake and Carl shared a boat, laughter bubbling as they capsized once. Emerging soaked and exhilarated, Carl's arm around Jake's waist in plain sight. Whispers followed, but so did nods, acceptance, tentative in the queer underbelly of finance. The afternoon session was the crucible. Great hall transformed into war room, projector humming with slides of turnaround metrics. Harold appeared via satellite, Mary beside him, her face serene, hand-stitched scarf a nod to fragility reclaimed. Sterling's not just numbers, he began, voice resonant. It's people. Mary taught me that, standing beside me through the dark. Even when I faltered, tears glistened, the room held breath. Carl followed. Seamless. Data on revenue spikes, client retentions, his vision for AI-driven ethics audits. We've learned from pain, he said, eyes locking on Jake's in the front row. Transparency isn't a buzzword, it's our blood. Applause thundered, but Voss rose then, poison in his smile. Inspiring. But let's talk skeletons. He tapped his tablet, and the projector flickered emails, forged timestamps implicating Carl in overlooking audit flags. Mary's rehab funded by slush. Gasps rippled. Carl paled. You bastard, Carl hissed, lunging forward, but Jake grabbed his arm. Steady now, fury channeled. Harold's face filled the screen. Thunderous. "Was, enough. Security's en route." But Voss wasn't done, turning to Carl with twisted tenderness. "For us, Carl. To bring you home." The room erupted shouts, chairs scraping. Jake's phone buzzed. An anonymous drop. Voss's digital trail laid bare, forwarded to him by a loyal IT mole. "Got you," Jake muttered, hitting send to the board chair. Security hauled Voss out, sputtering curses, his empire crumbling in zip-tied ignominy. The vote swung unanimous. Harold reinstated, Carl elevated to co-CEO, a dynasty reborn. Champagne flowed in the hall, backslaps and relief, but for Jake and Carl, it was escape to their cabin, door locked, bodies colliding in cathartic release. "You saved us," Carl gasped, hands framing Jake's face. Again, Jake kissed him deep. "We saved us," yet the aftershocks lingered. Back in the city, Mary's recovery steadied, weekly calls with Jake, her voice gaining strength, Harold's gratitude a blank check to charity. But Voss's arrest unearthed more. Not just leaks, but blackmail files on half the board, a web of resentment spun from scorned love. Carl testified, raw in the spotlight, his bisexuality a footnote in the scandal sheets. But Jake's hand in his during depositions said everything. Their romance bloomed fierce. Christmas in the Hamptons, Mary toasting them with eggnog, Harold's nod of approval a benediction. New Year's in Times Square, Carl on one knee, not proposing, but promising, "This is ours." No more hiding, but drama crested one February Eve. Voss out on bail, cornering Carl in a garage en route to dinner. "You think it's over?" Voss snarled, knife glinting, not to kill, but to scar, a message in flesh. Carl fought, elbow to jaw, but the blade grazed his arm, blood blooming on his coat. Jake arrived minutes later, alerted by a frantic text. Finding Carl slumped against the Audi, Voss fled into shadows. Sirens wailed, our stitches and statements blurring into nightmare. In the sterile room, Jake held Carl's good hand, tears hot. "I can't lose you." "You won't," Carl whispered, thumb tracing Jake's knuckles. "Betrayal's just the forge. We come out stronger." Voss was recaptured days later, trial looming like Judgment Day. But in the quiet aftermath, love deepened therapy for Carl's scars, both seen and unseen. Jake's promotion to creative director, earned in fire. The conflict had stripped them bare, revealing not weakness, but the human core flawed, fierce, unbreakable. Spring unfurled over Manhattan like a long-withheld apology. Cherry blossoms dusting the high line in pink defiance of winter's bite. 6 months post-Voss, Sterling hummed with renewal. Stock rebounding, headlines shifting from scandal to Whitaker Renaissance. Harold and Mary had relocated to a modest brownstone in Brooklyn. Her choice, grounding in the grit, hosting Sunday suppers where laughter drowned out old ghosts. Jake and Carl had become fixtures there. The kids, as Mary dubbed them, trading barbs over pot roast and Merlot. But peace was earned, not given. Carl's arm bore a faint scar, a silvery crescent that Jake traced in lazy mornings, lips following like a talisman. "Does it hurt?" he'd ask, voice soft. "Only if you stop," Carl would murmur, pulling him closer, their bodies a language of recovery. Slow dances in the kitchen to Coltrane, hikes in Prospect Park where hands swung free, unapologetic. The betrayal's echo lingered in subtler ways. Trust rebuilt brick by brick. Therapy sessions where Carl unpacked Voss's hold. The toxic cocktail of possession masquerading as passion. He made me doubt my worth, Carl confessed one rain-lashed afternoon, curled on the brownstone couch. Thought love meant ownership. Jake cupped his face. Earnest. Love's a choice. Every day. I choose you, scars. Spreadsheets. All. Jake's own wounds surfaced too. The fear of being the rebound. The stray Voss had sneered at. But Carl's steadiness eroded it. Notes slipped into lunch bags. Lunch on me. Heart on you. Surprise tickets to a revival of Angels in America, where tears mingled in the dark. Raw recognition of queer resilience. Climax revisited in July. Voss's trial, a media circus in federal court. Sleek prosecutors dismantling his digital fortress. Carl on the stand, voice steady as he recounted the garage ambush. It wasn't about the company, he testified, eyes on Jake in the gallery. It was personal. A man scorned, lashing out at what he couldn't have. The jury convicted Swift. 15 years. Plus restitution. Outside, flashes popped, but Carl bypassed the mics, beelining for Jake, kissing him fierce amid the chaos. A coming out, unscripted and unyielding. You didn't have to, Jake gasped later, in their Uber to the pier. Had to, Carl replied, hand warm on his knee. No more closets. Not for us. The romance crested that summer. A road trip down the eastern seaboard, top down on a rented Mustang. Carl's playlist heavy on Bruce and Bon Iver. They hit Rehoboth Beach, Delaware's gay haven. Bodies bronzed on sand, waves lapping secrets. One sunset, toes in surf. Carl dropped to one knee for real. A platinum band, simple, engraved from ruins. We rise. Marry me, Jake. Build this life, messy, magnificent, ours. Tears blurred the horizon. Jake's yes was a sob, sealed with salt-kissed lips. The wedding was intimate. Central Park Boathouse. Mary officiating in a thrift store gown. Harold beaming from the front row. His arm around her waist, a full circle. Vows echoed human truths. I promise to see your cracks, hold your storms, choose you in the quiet and the quake. Months later, as autumn leaves carpeted the village streets, Jake and Carl stood on their brownstone stoop, newly theirs, walls echoing with Mary's occasional visits, Harold's gruff advice on weekend projects. The company thrived, but so did they, a queer family forged in fire, human in its imperfections. One evening, as snow dusted the sill, Carl pulled Jake to the window, arms encircling from behind. Remember that party? The woman in the rain. Jake leaned back. Content. How could I forget? She brought us here. Mary had passed quietly that spring. Peaceful, in her sleep, after a year of sobriety and second chances. Her funeral was a celebration. Drag queens belting show tunes, colleagues toasting her spark. Harold had softened further, dating a gallery owner named Theo, his laughter rediscovering its timbre. In the end, it wasn't happily ever after, no tidy bows on grief or glory. But it was human, love as verb, betrayal as teacher, romance as rebellion against the grind. Jake Harlan, the man who'd invited a stranger to a party, had discovered not just a CEO's wife, but a life worth every unraveling thread. And as the city hummed below, Carl whispered, to more plot twists, Jake grinned. Bring him on.